Right there's a main reason why a cheap used Hyundai is simply not worth it. In my personal opinion, I've seen many vehicles recently burning roadside. I saw one burning in the middle of the night, and as well, I seen another one here roadside. I watched the firefighters put it out, and then hours later, they dragged it off, all for the total loss of the owner of these vehicles. So what's so wrong with a modern day Hyundai, and why are people continually buying them when they clearly have a reputation for resulting in a catastrophic failure such as that? Many years ago, Hyundai came out with products. For example, the Pony was the first to hit the market in North America. Then they came out with products like the Excel, which is a slightly upgraded version, slightly larger. And then we fast forward to 2004, where they introduced a new series of generation of engines. It's called the Theta 2 engine. They transformed from MPIs to GDIs, they introduced turbocharging, and they're an all-aluminum engine. These Theta 2 engines promise to be an affordable, practical solution with great technology. Initially, it came out with MPI, which is multi-port fuel injection, and then it came out with GDI, which was their version of a direct injected engine. Later on, they also introduced turbocharging, and the Theta 2 engine came out then with either 2 or 2.4 liter of displacement capacity under that hood. But people were buying these because they were relatively affordable, just like when the Hyundai Pony came out, just like when the Hyundai Excel came out. People just wanted to get their hands on a cheap, affordable mode of transportation. But allegedly, these engines were only actually engineered to run up to 150,000 miles. That's right, about 250,000 kilometers was the limits of the quality and the construction of that particular drivetrain. And while not everybody wanted to buy themselves a modern day vehicle that everybody knows, like Hondas, Toyotas, the CR-V right here is a tried and true tested result of quality engineering, and seldom does a Honda go wrong. Toyota, same thing. The RAV4 has a strong reputation, but you pay for that. And that's why people were looking for a more cost-effective solution. Instead of buying a Honda like this, CR-V with all-wheel drive, maybe let's try a Hyundai like that, and this is a Tucson. And so when you walk into the showroom, a lot of customers couldn't tell. They were just as shiny from the outside as a lot of their competitors from Hondas and Toyotas. I mean, they both have hatchbacks that flip up. You have the same level of practicality. They both have beautiful alloy wheels like in a Honda, not too much different than you're finding in a modern day Hyundai. You've got colored keyed handles like you do in a Honda. You get roof racks on top. They even give you a beautiful sunroof to enjoy the sun shining in on those beautiful days. And while Hyundai's mantra is essentially cost-effective motoring, sold at a very competitive price, it didn't mean all of the interior parts or the external parts looked any cheaper than some of their competitors from Honda and Toyota. I mean, in the back seats, we had lots of room. You had the split folding rear seats. You had lots of great high-quality fabrics. It was very, very nice. You had lots of room in the back to haul your dogs, your kits, your groceries, and everything else to the store. Of course, even at the back, you have a little DC plug in here. You have magazine pouches right there. And you basically had an interior that easily matched from those of Toyota and Honda. But then in the front, you also had a relatively consistent interior. While you had miles and miles of plastic like some of the products from Toyota and Honda, the fact remains is this was everything that those other two brands would muster up. So people saw the value in buying these vehicles. They had everything that the competitors Honda and Toyota were offering up, but they did it much more affordably. So then buying them on the used car market seems even a better deal when you incorporate depreciation, doesn't it? Wrong. That's where, in my opinion, this would be the biggest mistake to go out and buy yourself a used Hyundai and Kia product, specifically with the Theta 2 and Theta 2 GDI and MPI engines that you're finding in a lot of these vehicles. The vast majority of models that carried that engine were likely incorporated in some of these major engine failures that we're seeing right here. And while there's many people that would use the argument that, well, that was the older generation of engines that had issues, but there's also an argument that the latest generation, even for example in the 2-liter NU MPI engines that you're finding in vehicles like the 2019 to 2021 Konas, the Velostars, as well as the Elantras, had serious issues with related to the way the piston rings were treated. It led to premature oil consumption and typically a bad engine, burning oil way before its time. But we're not talking about those series of engines. We're also not talking about the fact that there was electrical gremlins, for example, like the ABS module that had a good probability of failing because internally the brake fluid would contaminate the electrics and ultimately result in a catastrophic failure. The big issue is the Theta 2 engines that you're finding in a lot of vehicles like this that end up resulting in a roadside fire. Basically, when you look at this, what do you have left? There's what's remnants of a battery. Here's the residual of what we have, a radiator. There's a bad alternator all cooked. The intake manifold's all burnt up. All the wiring has lost all of its insulation, and now all we have is bare wiring left. Paint is cooked, rubber's burnt, and even glass can burn too. So it's quite interesting that it doesn't get enough airtime. And while there are a lot of very happy customers who own Hyundai products with the Theta 2 GDI engines and MPI engines, the fact remains is it feels like it's largely a North American issue. A lot of the products were manufactured this side of the sea. And that's why, even in my opinion, getting a great deal on a slightly used Hyundai like this with those generations of engines represents one of the worst decisions I could personally make ever in my life. I have a friend that actually bought a Kia with the exact same engine, because Kia and Hyundai are brother and sister company, and her engine resulted in a severe knock. She had to take the vehicle into the dealership for diagnosis, and resulting in a big estimate for a replaced engine. She ended up just trading it off for $2,000 for basically scrap material and went and bought a new vehicle. Definitely not from the same brand. But what's the issue here, and how do you know if you have a problem? Well, firstly, you have to recognize some of the early warning signs. Early engine cold start on a lot of these Theta 2 engines tend to sound a little bit like a diesel. So it's not uncommon to get a rattly, diesely noise for the first couple minutes. That wasn't necessarily an indication that you had a problem, but it was an indication of overall general quality of the engine. Now, if you're in a position where that engine's on the way out, you might actually start to hear revving. As you rev the engine, you hear a knock, 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 knock as you rev up, and it follows the RPM of the engine. So as you rev up, you hear more frequency of that knock, which could represent a particular rod bearing at the bottom of the engine that has a failure point or imminent failure point. And that's what you're hearing, is that rod knock at the back, the connection between the crankshaft and the connecting rod. Now, of course, you can result in severe rod bearing failure, which of course can mean just ultimately just excessive heat, could mean a check engine light, fuel light. You might even get smoke out of the exhaust in an extreme situation. Even worst case, the vehicle just stalls or stops running, and you could result in actually just having to pull over roadside to get this vehicle tended to, because usually it'll just shut off, die completely. But the worst case scenario is all that heat that's built up in the rod, which your connecting interface between your connecting rod and your crankshaft, is where the rod bearings reside. And those rod bearings are known to prematurely fail, primarily because there was extra residual materials moving around in the oil link passages during the ownership life of the vehicle. That happened as a result of poor cleaning, allegedly, due to materials, stray materials, when they were machining some of the internal engine parts, just stayed in there. They weren't cleansed properly, and then unfortunately, those parts made their way around, locked up somewhere in the bottom end, and then sadly created hot spots in the rod bearings, and that then resulted in a catastrophic engine failure. Now, the unfortunate part is it wasn't a small series or a small group of these engines that you would find that had this issue. This went on and on and on, and allegedly there was a slower response by the manufacturer that there was an issue. This went on, and it got to the point where finally they actually had to step up, pony up, and start replacing engines. They've since then extended the engine warranty, but there were caveats associated with that. Just like with our friend, if you don't have that software reinstalled, the knock detection, and as well just the overall detection for that system installed by the dealer and the OEM, then that would be their weasel clause, and you may not actually qualify to get yourself a replacement engine. The bottom line is there's way too many of them, and while every manufacturer has vehicles that have had problems, it's all about percentages. It's all about statistics. And if you're hitting a much higher percentage of vehicles that are resulting in this kind of failure, most vehicles built by manufacturers like Honda or Toyota generally don't have catastrophic failures. They might start to burn a little oil, sound a little rattly, but seldom does a Honda end up in a situation like this. And unfortunately, the higher numbers of these vehicles that you see laying around is a big indication that there is a big issue. And that's why, regardless, suffice it to say, long warranties or no long warranties, I could never in my right mind ever advise somebody buying one of these vehicles for themselves. Way too many problems. The probability of having a catastrophic failure, if you're dealing with one of those vehicles with the Theta 2 or Theta 2 GDI engines, then there's a high probability you're going to experience an issue. I'm not saying you're going to have this result, but it could be anywhere in between. It could even be a minor issue that you're just living with for years, but the sad reality is it's not the greatest engine, and it was only built to last 150,000 miles on a good day. And with all of that said, check out right there, 2024's worst vehicles, least reliable. You're gonna love that one. Hope to see each and every one in the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.